Thank you very much, Dr. Taj, for, I will put it, very comprehensive, very wide scope presentation. As a starting point, despite its complex, comprehensive topics about the topic on Islam and reform, it is just an introduction. And one of my favorite slides that Dr. Taj presented when on the topic of theology, which you can see how do we imagine, or how do we understand religion itself, covers wide spectrum of elements and categories within the discussion of reform. This is important to be addressed because that when we want to talk or discuss about reform, it's not just imagining something petty, small things. It covers something which is wide, and in fact I would say in a practical way, each and every one of us, we may have any particular interest related to our studies or our research, and from all elements, okay, this here, there are so many parts that we can capture to look into further details and what is it that we want to talk about reform in our own works, in practical studies and research as well. Even though my other favorite is actually the diagram of the dialectics. Yeah, because the dialectics is something of my own interest as well, but that one we can cover in a different discussion maybe. Okay, but I want to open up the room for discussions and questions so that we can look into how do we explore further our discussion for now and going towards the coming later session. I'm going to open up to 3 questions first as the start, and then we'll see how this goes. Right, please raise your hands. Usual. The first question is always difficult, and then everyone starts to prove that. All right.
You're putting a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe not something too difficult yet. That would start off with a very high standard. Okay. Anyone first? Dr. Farouk, maybe.
Thank you, Dr. Taj, for your presentation this morning. I think it's very enlightening that you actually expand and the details, the problems that we have in, challenges that we face in reforms. But I want to ask you, where do we put bias and prejudice in all your details? Because I think the reason why challenges and problems in reforms and whatnot is because there's bias and prejudice. For example, elected universalism is already ethnic bias in that. You know, it is one of manifestation of ethnic bias. So where do we put bias and prejudice in your what do you call it? Your presentation?
Thank you, Doctor, for a good presentation. I think I may add on to Huda's question, which is one of the points that you pointed out about the general principles of reform is there are 2 things. Creating mechanisms to enjoin the good by promoting good is Desan. And if I get it right, imposing mechanisms to forbid evil by restricting the needs. Okay. What is the can you expand a bit to what extent this should be upheld? Because I think if you have biases and prejudices, I think you can see something not good that shows up. Even if you can say that I'm doing reform in this principle, I'm upholding reform principles, but is it the best way of doing it?
Hi.
You see, in my thoughts, in Malaysia, especially when we talk about reforms, Islamic reforms, there are many groups, and part of progressive reforms are like RF, but we have another Islamic groups like Abim, Ikram, where they try to get into education systems and everything. And how do we say that type of reform when it's not so progressive, it's a bit of conservative and a bit of ultra-nationalist, and how can we define that reforms? And then, but they think they're doing reforms, right? And when you were saying about communal error, about mistakes, forgiven and coercion, I was thinking like, is it fine doing everything? Like, you were saying in your slides about communal error that prophets will forgive because people make mistakes and it's forgiven, right? You were saying in your slides, and the Yeah. So it's these kind of things that it's fine doing it because it's the name of reform thinking.
You asked, was it bias, implicit bias? Is that what you said?
Bias and prejudice.
Where does this fit? The last principle is the most important, is sincerity. Right? Do we have biases and agendas? Absolutely, right? I mean, complete objective truths. I think really in the Muslim epistemology, there's the idea of halil haqqu yata'addad. Can there be many truths, multiple truths in a sense? Some argue yes, the majority said no, right? Truth is one, like death is as well. Right? The means are many, but death is one. The ultimate reality. So the thing is, this is how do we avoid this? In short, we can't, in that sense, right? And that's why any reform move, if we are to argue that it's a liberation theology, how much impositions can we do? Right? Really, it's just going to be time specific. Anything we might agree right now, 6 months down the line, we can say forget about it. And that was the same thing at the time of the early generations. Today I'm saying something, tomorrow Abu Hanifa, tomorrow I'll say something else. Don't write this knowledge down. But really, we have to be aware of these limitations. And I think that's the reason why I've said, moving on to the third question is, okay, the idea of forgiveness as well from Allah to us, is that we can discuss this out like that afterwards if we like, right? But that's, in short, I'll say yes, it's something that we have to be aware of. Sorry, I got a question for you, Huda. You said ethnic bias. What could you just explain what you meant by that?
Maybe I might misunderstand your word Meccan universalism. Does it mean the Makkiyah period?
Yeah, not Mecca as a place.
Okay, I'm sorry. But there is a phenomenon where actually somehow they will put the Quraysh is the superior group. So this is some sort of ethnic bias that's happening, manifested in our tradition. So this is a manifestation of ethnic bias.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously,
sorry, I misunderstand that.
On the third session, I think there's a bit of politics in that. We'll cover this type of, it's something which is in the tradition, in Quraysh.
Yeah.
The Quraysh should run our affairs. They had a long time. Yeah. And look at the mess we're in. So there's that. We didn't give the others a chance. Although Abdul Habashia, right? We should have. Things would have been different. But we'll cover that. Right? Is that okay? The second question. So Islam in short is first of all, there's the Hadith tradition. Every innovation is kullu muhdathatin bid'ah wa kullu bid'atin dalalah wa kullu dalalatin fi nar. Every new thing is a bid'ah, heresy, however you want to translate that, and every heresy is in the hellfire. Now, everything new is obviously could be considered that microphone and all technology. And in fact, many did. There were some who says kullu bid'ah because it says cool, it says all. That was a minority who held that view. Nowadays you can call that Luddites. Right? The Luddites were actually revolutionaries as well. They were just against technology for the sake of technology. It was because of what we was doing to the working man. Right? And in fact, in the future we might see the same things, right, with the services industry, right, what it's doing now. The others understood it is every bid'ah in the religion. Right, so this is a view. Every innovation in the religion, and so whatever that innovation is. And then there was another group, and it's actually, these are the majority, that is any bad innovation in the religion, but not every good innovation in the religion. So the minority view is that all innovations are bad in and of themselves. There's a problem because it's what you consider as good and bad is subjective. So I agree that there is that's the human limitations of producing knowledge. That it's always going to be challenged. And as long as we're aware of that and can deal with it, then that's fine. Myself, I'm happy with Bid'ah Hasana. It's something that myself, I'm contributing to Mawlid. This is something most Muslim lands you find. The second one, I can give you an example of the Sunnah Zaria. Now you can actually see the implications outside of the Islamic tradition as well. So you have Khalwa. Khalwa was something which was, you could say, invented. There are some of these traditions that man being alone, the third is shaitan, and then you use that hadith tradition and mechanize it in a certain way. So Khalwa becomes something, right? Now, and also, free mixing, all this sort of stuff. So even when we see it in other traditions, and a lot of people have actually latched on this now, right? They're a lot more comfortable now. Again, going back to Meccan universalism, how do you manage it there, right? So so the art stuff, the free mixing stuff, and the khalwa stuff, a lot of these things were to prevent the haram, so the fear of zina and all this sort of stuff. Let's limit this stuff. Now that limiting this stuff had many different limits, right? So if you see what I'm saying. And in fact, you have this in the Jewish tradition, Chabad, and also the Christians. So you usually think the Christians wouldn't, but there's Mike Pence, Trump's actually follows something called, I think it's Bill Graham principle, which is the fact that he won't have dinner with another woman other than his wife. Very strict on this stuff. But again, Billy Graham's 20th century theologian, that they have to reform to get this thing. They probably looked at the Muslim tradition or the Jewish tradition. This happens quite often, right? Borrowing from the others. So that's an example of your question about to what extent can you regulate these things. Unfortunately, Saudi, a lot of problems have happened there because of these things. I don't know if you remember the 19 girls that were in the hostel because they were in their 90s, right? They didn't let the fire service in. It's because of this sort of stuff, right? So saving a life. Anyway, so that's that one. The third one, what was it again? Is about the mistakes of the Ummah. You asked, is it okay in that sense? Is that look, what I'm trying to say is there's certain things that we've inherited from, especially in the jurisprudential tradition. Now, slavery was one of those things, right? But in fact, over time, the ulama themselves came around it. 19th century, many of the ulama were challenged on this. And, most Muslims wouldn't know that slavery is there in the Muslim tradition. So a lot of things that we don't know, we inherit from the previous generation and their knowledge. They're products of that time as well. And I think that's something that we have to understand, that in terms of one soul doesn't bear the burden of another soul in the general sense. That's what I mean by it's forgiven in that sense. Right? If we continue it knowingly, well then that's a different thing. Right? So we don't want to perpetuate those sort of mistakes. But that's what the hadith is.
Thank you very much, Dr. Islam. My confusion is more on who has the right to reform, and if that person or any institution has the right to reform. Maybe if it's, sorry, let me rephrase this. If an individual has the right to reform, how do we introspect oneself of our lack of knowledge, of our lack of understanding in a certain discipline, and to actually submit ourselves to the current authority or any precedent that we already have, because we know ourselves that we are flawed in nature and we are not in the mastering of that discipline. Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Yahya. I come from Indonesia. Talking about the reform in our main source of our religion is Quran. I see there are a lot of modern mufassir that don't rely anymore on hadith to exegete the Quran. And is it can be called as bid'ah hasanah also if we left the hadith as our source to exegete the Quran. The example is Hamka and Toba-Tobai, for example. They don't rely much on hadith to exegete the Quran, because if they rely on hadith, they just stuck at that period where hadith come, and that cannot be cannot produce the new product of exegesis itself. And my question is it a must for us to left behind the hadith to make the new product of exegesis of Quran itself? Thank you.
Mine is related to what the sister has mentioned. I think anyone who studies Islamic studies or who at least is in tune with Muslim history will know what you have presented. This is something that is kind of common knowledge in terms of the diversity and the dynamism within the Islamic traditions, because a lot of it is covering actually on the how of it, which is to be found in scholarship. But I think there is also the question of who decides which reform and how to reform, and underneath that is essentially a question of power. We know that in the past, for example, there were hundreds of madhahib, but of course now it's four within the Sunni tradition, and that also has got to do with the sociological as well as the political and the essential element of the movement of ideas that is underpinned also by power. Traditionally, of course, we can say the power resides in the ulama or the rulers, and also maybe in collective wisdom in terms of the people. And that interplay between these three needs to be fleshed out, I thought. And perhaps I would like you to comment a bit more on that, because it also relates to the conditions of society also in the notion of freedom that is being allowed, or the latitude that is being allowed for these three elements to interplay with each other. I think the expansion of freedom will find a lot more easier for all these reforms to take place, but with the constriction of freedom, then you find a lot more conservatism. And I think essentially in a modern civilization that we have, the coercive power of the centralized state is where I think the problem of reform becomes much more difficult.
Okay, the first one is the question of authority. Who has the right to reform? I'm going to borrow from the last question, the idea of collective wisdom. First of all, if we don't have a vocation from God, right, who really gives us that right? There's your own decisions that you have to make. You said you used the word introspection, and the Prophet said this: ask your heart, from your heart. If you don't have centralized authority, then everyone can argue their piece, and that's what's always been there in the religious tradition. With the concept of bay'ah and all this sort of stuff, people will say, look, this is the rightful amir, and you should give that person bay'ah. In short, the idea of authority and who has that appeal is one which is the politics of power as well. Who has power ultimately gives that authority. The Ijazah system was one which really was not initially about power, but more about barakah in the early days. In essence, everyone, if we think of just following some of the principles of religion itself, so if we start with Aqidah, it's actually most of the schools of theology that I've come across argue it is haram, taqleed of in Aqidah. In fiqh, taqleed, no, not a problem. Even in the Shia tradition, marja taqleed is about the Madhab Jafi school, more or less. But how you understand God, it should be your own interpretations. Even the field of tafsir, I'll cover later. Tafsir, there's an approach to tafsir, your first approach at least. So there has been this type of individualism of how you, there should be no intermediary between you and God. So that's one aspect of it, the aspect of exercising your own judgment. But there is a concept in the Quran, follow Allah and His Messenger, those in authority amongst you. Who are those in authority amongst you? Essentially, it goes down to power, right? Whoever has sultan. Right? So that's that. In short, if I could answer that one. The second question, I thought was a very good question in terms of. I will bring this up again. Right? You mentioned some things about modern tafsir. Modern tafsir doesn't rely much on hadith, if I got that correct. Neither did traditional tafsir as well. In that sense, right? There's two types of tafsir. There's the hadith-based tafsir, which is ma'thur, and then there's the non-hadith-based one, which is ra'i, more or less, linguistics, sometimes philosophy, history, and all just ijtihad-based tafsir. And a lot of tafsir is like this, the classical tafsirs as well. The Prophet, did he commentate much about the Quran? Suyuti says very little. Ibn Taymiyyah says a lot. So it just depends how you approach this. You mentioned Allama Tabatabai, so follow the Shia scholar. Even the Shia tradition, sometimes they use hadith tradition to explain, especially if it's the Ahlul Bayt scholarship, is hadith, they rely on hadith. If not, then it's the sciences of the day, if you like. It's not too different from the old days in that sense. The science of the Quran, the way how the cosmology of the Quran has changed now. So before, it was geocentric. The Earth was at the center of the solar system, and that's the way they understood those verses pertaining to the natural world and astronomy. Now it's heliocentric. The sun is at the center of the solar system. There was a lot of controversy regarding the 20th century regarding the heliocentric worldview. Third question was going back to power. Yes, so I think there's the whole the concept of the modern state as well, centralized authority. We never really had that. Even the fiqh tradition, where we understand it now, a lot of our problems with blasphemy laws and all this stuff is down to the fact that law became codified under colonialism. They were the first to codify family law and also some aspects of the penal code as well. In the Indian tradition, Tazirat, now they call it something else like that. The old Bollywood films, Tazirat, right? The 420, right? Larceny. So I think that centralization can be a problem. The modern state is what those are people called Ijtihads, the Muslims as well, is a result of this, right? Muhammad's Hidayah gets incorporated in colonial law.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Doctor, for the explanation. I just want to ask, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, there is one method in usul fiqh about we have to look into the end consequence of every decision, because every decision have the consequence in usul fiqh. Is it okay? And same with, we have to choose the less evil, because we cannot get rid of all the evil, so we have to choose the less evil. And nowadays we always heard about the maqasid, the five aspects of Shabbir that we should look into. So where all of these fit into the picture that you have presented?
The qawaid fiqh here, the legal maxims, these are the principles that are the results of studying the principles of the Quran and the Sunnah and the legal tradition. And then these traditions, if we go back to one of the slides, I forgot which one it was, I think it's, yeah, this one. So these 11 of these sources, those principles, innocent until proven guilty, al-aslu bara'at al-dhimma, the one you mentioned was yukhtaru ahwar al-bariyatain, the lesser of the two evils, or yukhtaru ahwar al-sharrain. The lesser of two evils is a Sharia principle. And the five maqasid that you mentioned, the objectives of Sharia. It took people a lot of time to think that there are actually principles of Sharia. This philosophizing Sharia was a later product of Islamic law. And some added a sixth one, which was honor and integrity. So when you get this whole honor as a principle, is from there, right? Family as well is an extension of family. Where does it fit? Well, it encompasses the whole thing. That's, in short, the answer. right? And this slide itself, where the rational, where you can see the rational block. That's what it is. It's the rationalization of Sharia itself. That look, it's for life, it's for religion, it's for family, and it's for security and sanity and everything else. So that's the way how we look at it. In fact, I think it was it Natalafi? One of the Hanbali scholars, later I can't remember his name properly, but he was the only one who actually argued that the text has to be understood. I mean, sometimes the five can overrule the text. His was the most controversial, but everyone else generally said, look, the five principles are there, but they have to concur with the wording of the Quran at least. Shatibi and many others, that's their approach, and even Ashur. All of that is important. Right? I think most of the reform work, if it wasn't for the Maqasidi type, we're indebted to the Maqasidi approach. In common law, international law, I think the man's name is Dias, those of you who are legal scholars, you know. They call it object-oriented jurisprudence. So they've got these sort of principles as well. Human rights and the right to life and other things.
Hello, I'm Ahmad. Okay, from your presentation just now, and even the source of this is the source of the Sharia.
Yeah.
Okay, it seems that it shows a pattern of going into more and more rationalized. Like the sources become, people start to think in a more rationalized manner, which it seems that people are going more and more in a individualistic manner. So, would you see that in today's time, it's like to conform with today's reality, that more and more they should accommodate more demands. How to say? Should the Sharia be as to accommodate more individual demands?
So the freedom of, you speak of individual rights, is that what you're trying to say?
Because I see like people are more going into agency than structure. So is that the way forward for Islam right now? Like the current reality right now, because it seems that the methods is more and more individualistic.
We have our own individuality as persons, as individuals, but we do have a communal existence as well. We have a social contract in general where we exist in society. But some of this is good, individualistic, but there's also how we contribute to society as a whole and as a community as a whole. I think it's just balancing this whole thing, that the community shouldn't be like a totalic entity, and neither should the individual have complete. Well, you have your own freedoms in that sense, but for you to dictate to everybody else as well, it shouldn't be dictatorial from the individual to everybody else as well. I think it's a very difficult balance, this whole thing, but it's an acute observation. So we are thinking about this in general.
I'm Izan. I got maybe 3 questions.
3 questions.
The first one is related to the one you mentioned about communal error. So I'm referring to Iqra, the cohesion.
Yeah.
Because last November I participated in a lecture by Dr. Dio on his PhD thesis about Ibn Jawzi.
Okay.
So based on the kitab Asful Ulama al-Umara, Umara al-Ulama, inclination of ulama towards the rulers. So the idea about that is actually the reform from the ulama towards the, like they give nasiha to the ruler, and then he actually distinguished between what Ibn Jawzi proposed, which is more on inclination towards the ulama, instead of what Al-Ghazali proposed, is more harsh, like towards the ulama, meaning more direct or something like that. So would you care to elaborate more on that? Because like right now we have more state-sponsored ulama, maybe in Malaysia or in the Gulf states, where like the fatwa is maybe is lead the ummah towards more, the bigotry or something like that. So the second question is about, you mentioned about social contract. So you mentioned about bay'ah, allegiance. Would you elaborate more on this, especially in UK, basically in Muslim minority country, because usually when we talk about allegiance, like in Muslim minority, the majority non-Muslim, they say that actually the Muslim are not like have bay'ah towards the state, so they are just actually like maybe in the UK friends familiar with the creeping Sharia thing. Yeah, and the third one is you mentioned about Jewish tradition. Would you elaborate more, like the tradition that we have from the previous talk, especially on number 10 that because in Prof. Shari Lewin in her book The Making of Forefathers, she actually mentioned that some of the exegesis that we have, the narrative is actually, especially on Abraham and Moses, came from the exegesis of the Jewish tradition. So, yeah.
This is something that we have to yesterday when Professor Chandra spoke about hegemony. We had that problem in the 90s. This type of literature has actually been revitalized because of there was the phenomenon in the West. I'm saying this is in the West how it was portrayed to us was what they call the scholars for dollars thing, and it was because of what happened the first Gulf War. Saudi, obviously Saudi presence with the presence of US troops in Saudi was seen as an occupation according to some sections within the Salafi movement at the time. So, but this term came about, scholars for dollars, right? That all of a sudden, wala bara. This is very strong in the traditional Salafi rhetoric, right? Affiliation and dissociation. So affiliation to Islam and dissociation from kufr, shirk, and the rest of it. Now, the idea of actually getting help from non-Muslims, right? The fatwa was given that yes, you can get help from outside. And the permanent committee lost a lot of popularity in that sense. And now people have been threatened to be executed. From that schism, really, it started a lot earlier on. Look, this is something which is in the absence of. It's really a lot of this in the modern state as well. So in the classical period, that was the case as well, right? Where there's a hadith actually, is of Manat sultana, whoever comes close to the sultan is always going to be in tribulation. Right? I guess it's the same case even with academia. There are academics who might be very close to if you like, the agenda, whatever the agenda is, rather than go back to individuality. So this is something which should be avoided, and just I don't know how I can answer that. That's it, really, if that helps. The second question you asked, what was that? Oh, the bay'ah. You said in Britain, what do they say that they? What was it again? You said creeping Sharia type stuff. Britain's an interesting case. What can I say? The thing is, look, the idea of citizenship. Sometimes, look, I was born there, so you need to think about these things until you travel the world and you realize the world's bigger than one place. So what happened is after independence, 47, what happened was after the Second World War, there was a shortage of workers. My father, my grandfather, and others went to the United Kingdom. In those days, there was no immigration as such. It was just you going up to the motherland if you like. But then the appearance of so many brown people scared the locals. And then suddenly, instead of just coming from the Commonwealth, we became immigrants. So an immigration act was put forward. Then citizenship, then nationalization law. Now, the idea of bay'ah, yes, is there. Right? As soon as you're a citizen, it's just implied that that bay'ah is there, right, to the Queen, or in this country it's the same. There is a question, and I think I'll deal with this later, Sam, if it's all right, Farouk, is the idea of citizenship vis-a-vis ummah. I think we could discuss that later if that's all right. And the third question was, you were speaking about exegesis and its dependence on the Israeliyat, the Jewish tradition. Not all of it is Jewish, some of it is Christian as well, the Masihiyat, if you like. We tend not to call it Masihiyat, and just generally call it Israeliyat as well. But a lot of that stuff is there. When it comes to the stories of the prophets in the Quran, I think you mentioned that, right? A lot of that is, yes, from the Israeliyat traditions. When it comes to the end of days, a lot of that stuff is Masihiyat, it's the Book of Revelations and the Gospel traditions, right? So that most we've always been comfortable with as well. There's a Hadith tradition, quote from Bani Israel, what is it? Hadith on Bani Israel wala haraj. Bukhari and Ahmad. Quote from Bani Israel, there's no problem. Then there's another one from Bukhari and Ahmad, right? La tusaddiquhum wa la tukadhibuhum. Don't confirm what they say, neither deny what they say. So it's a tricky one, but it's always been there. Now, regarding the Sharia, I said that there are some things that Islam has taken from previous law. Our prawns, halal here. What does the Shafis do? You guys ruined us. Indonesia, like that. The whole Islamic halal food guide really made our lives hard in England, right? We didn't know these E471s, all this sort of stuff, right? We got taught by the Indonesians. Right? So a lot of this stuff, right? Are prawns halal? What do the say here?
Yeah, it's expensive.
It's expensive, okay. Right? So there's this whole thing in the Hanafis, except in Bangladesh, right? We don't accept this thing. We do talfiq on this issue. We go with the Shafis, right? So the analogy, the analog of marine life, the Hanafis were using on land animals. So predatory animals in the sea are the same as predatory animals on land. So some shark and other things will be haram or makruh. Largely makruh because there's nothing there in the Quran that easily. It's quite hard to just say outright it's haram. So, but where did a lot of this stuff come from? Especially in the Hanafi tradition and some of the Jafaris as well, is the dietary law, marine dietary law is very much is kosher. And why is that? It's because Abu Hanifa was in jail with Rabbi Anon. I think it's David bin Ammon, right? You can look it up, you'll find it on Wikipedia. And the thing is, this is, it's fine, but it's a principle. Shar'u man qablana, the Sharia of those who came before us. Why? Because the rationalizations are they're good rationalizations. They might not be to your taste, right, if you like prawn size. So, this is part of Shar'u man qablana. The hudud, certain aspects of the hudud rajam. The Sunnis and the Jafaris, they accept this. The Ibadis don't. Remember, they were supposed to be the Khawarij. Heads related to these guys. They're saying, oh my God, this is too barbaric. But the Khawarij is saying there's problems here. Like, they're saying, look, we're not following the previous law on this issue because it's not there in the Quran. That's how they're doing this. That's one issue that they haven't taken. But it is one which is they debate. If it conforms to the Quran, then we accept it. If it doesn't, it goes against it, then we don't. But largely, because all this stuff is, the Quran's been silent now. So you can't really say it's going against the Quran as such. So these are some of the aspects of Sharia. Yes, there are things from the Jewish Torah.